This morning, the government released the July inflation report, and the headline number came in exactly where economists expected, 3.4%, a slight cooling from June. Every major outlet is calling it good news. Buried inside that same report, reported by the government's own numbers, is a fact that should matter far more to you personally than the headline. Your paycheck has now bought less than it did a year earlier for 4 consecutive months in a row, not slowed growth. An actual decline in what your income can purchase month after month, while the headline story tells you things are cooling off. I want to walk you through the real numbers underneath today's report, because the gap between what got announced and what you are actually experiencing is exactly the kind of gap worth understanding clearly. Here is the twist, and I am giving it to you immediately instead of making you wait. Average hourly earnings actually fell 0.2% compared to a year ago, even as prices rose 3.4% over that same stretch. Do that subtraction yourself. Wages did not merely fail to keep pace with inflation this month. They fell in nominal terms, while prices kept climbing. A genuinely rare and uncomfortable combination. The nation's chief economist at one major financial institution put it plainly today. Inflation has been wiping out wage gains for 4 straight months, and for middle-income and lower-income households, this is the actual issue sitting underneath every headline calling. Today's report reassuring. Before I go further, I want to know who is with me right now. Tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from, and tell me honestly whether your own monthly budget has felt tighter this year, regardless of what the headline inflation number has told you. I read these, and I promise you the pattern in the comments under a video like this always reveals how far the lived experience of rising costs has drifted from the calm, reassuring language used to describe it. Let me walk through the specific numbers, because a single headline percentage flattens out a reality that looks very different once you break it apart into what people are actually paying for. Gasoline prices are up 24.6% over the past year, even after a monthly dip in July. Fuel oil is up 39.1% over the same stretch. Airline fares have climbed 25.5% year over year. Electricity costs are up 4.2%. Shelter alone accounted for roughly 2/3 of this month's entire headline increase, with a key measure of what property owners could charge, in rent rising 0.3% in a single month. These are not obscure categories. This is what heats your home, fuels your car, and pays your rent. And every one of those numbers is running dramatically hotter than the calm 3.4% headline suggests, because a single blended average, by design, smooths away exactly the categories hitting real households the hardest. If you are finding this useful already, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, because the next part explains why the Federal Reserve's own internal argument did not calm down today the way the headline number might suggest it should have. And it is a detail almost no coverage of today's report gave the attention it deserves. Here is what happened inside the Fed's own public commentary today. And it directly contradicts the reassuring tone of the headline coverage. Cleveland Fed President Beth Hammack wrote publicly, on the very day this in-line cooling report was released, that now is the time to act, warning that the longer the Fed waits to bring inflation back to its 2% target, the more challenging and more expensive that fight becomes for the American people. She has separately stated that multiple rate hikes may still be needed to actually tame this problem. Understand what that means. A report that came in exactly as economists expected, a report being widely described as reassuring, was not reassuring enough to stop a sitting Fed president from publicly pushing for tighter policy on the very same day. That tension, a calm headline sitting directly beside continued hawkish pressure from inside the Fed itself, tells you the underlying argument about how serious this inflation problem really is has not been resolved just because 1 month's number landed close to forecast. Let me make this real with 2 people, because none of this matters until you see how it lands in an actual life. Neither is real. but both are the kind of person you might recognize. The first I will call Alistair, 72, who read today's headline 3.4% cooling, in line with expectations, and felt genuine relief, assuming the pressure on his monthly budget must finally be easing along with the number. He has not gone back to check his own actual gas receipts, his own electricity bill, his own rent or mortgage costs against that single blended average. And so he has no real sense of how disconnected his own specific monthly expenses have become from the calm story. The headline told him this morning. The second person I will call Millicent, 69, and she has developed the habit of checking her own specific categories against the headline every single month rather than accepting the blended number at face value. She noticed months ago that her own gas and electricity costs were running far hotter than the overall inflation rate being reported. And today's numbers, gasoline up nearly 25%, fuel oil up nearly 40%, simply confirmed in the government's own data what she had already been living through in her own bank statements for months. Alistair felt reassured by a number. Millicent had already done the work to know her own real experience did not match that number. Months before today's report made the gap official. The difference between them was never how much either one had saved. It was that one of them trusted a single blended average to describe his own specific life, and one of them had already learned that a headline number and a lived reality can drift meaningfully apart long before any single report makes that gap impossible to ignore. Now, why do so many careful, sensible people end up like Alistair, trusting a single blended percentage to describe an experience that is actually far more specific and personal than any single average can capture? There is a simple, well-documented reason. A single number is easy to hold in your mind, easy to repeat, easy to feel reassured or alarmed by. In an instant, the actual texture underneath it, dozens of separate categories moving at wildly different speeds. Some cooling, some still surging, requires real effort to unpack. And most coverage of a report like today's simply does not do that work for you. The people who navigate inflation most clearly are rarely the ones with access to secret information. They are the ones willing to check their own specific categories against the headline every single month, rather than trusting one blended number to describe a genuinely uneven reality. There is a historical echo worth knowing here, because a period of wages quietly losing ground to prices, even while headline inflation looks tame or improving, has shown up before at real cost to ordinary households in stretches of the 1970s. And again, in the years following the 2008 financial crisis, real wage growth lagged behind price increases for extended periods, even as headline inflation numbers fluctuated up and down from month to month. And the cumulative effect on ordinary household purchasing power built quietly over years, rather than announcing itself in any single dramatic report. The lesson from those periods is not that today is an exact repeat, because it never is. It is that a string of months where wages lose ground to prices, even a modest amount each month, compounds into a real and lasting erosion of what an ordinary paycheck can actually buy. And that erosion is precisely the kind of slow-moving story that a single reassuring headline is the least equipped format to ever capture. Now let me be careful and honest with you, because I will not insult you with fear. And this exact subject draws people who want to frighten you into a rushed decision. Today's report genuinely did come in line with expectations, and 2 consecutive months of relatively tame monthly readings is a real meaningful signal that the sharpest energy-driven burst from earlier this year may be easing, not a manufactured talking point. Core inflation, which strips out food and energy, sits at 2.5%. Meaningfully closer to the Fed's target than the headline figure. It is entirely possible this cooling trend continues and genuinely eases pressure on household budgets in the months ahead. Not every part of this story is bad news, and I do not want to leave you with a falsely bleak picture when the actual data contains real, legitimate signs of improvement alongside the parts that deserve more scrutiny. What I am giving you is not a reason to panic about today's number. It is the fuller picture underneath a headline that, while technically accurate, leaves out exactly the details that determine whether your own specific monthly budget actually feels the relief that headline is describing. I want to say a word about gold and silver here, because this exact gap, a calm blended average sitting on top of real uneven cost pressure in specific categories, is precisely the kind of environment that has historically driven interest toward assets that do not depend on any single government index to hold their value. That does not make gold or silver a guaranteed answer to a real wage squeeze, and both carry real volatility of their own. But understanding that your own lived cost of living may be running meaningfully hotter than the smooth headline number energy and shelter chief among the categories still running hot is exactly the kind of clear-eyed information that should inform how you think about protecting your own purchasing power, rather than trusting a single reassuring percentage to tell the whole story on its own. So let us pull this together and go back to where we started. Today's inflation report came in at 3.4%, cooling and in line with expectations, and it is being widely described as good news. Underneath that headline, average hourly earnings actually fell 0.2% over the past year, meaning real wages have now lagged inflation for 4 consecutive months. Gasoline is up nearly 25% over the year. Fuel oil up nearly 40%. Airfares up over 25%. And shelter alone drove 2/3 of this month's entire increase. And on the very same morning this calming report landed, a sitting Federal Reserve president publicly stated that now is the time to act and that multiple rate hikes may still be needed. The difference between the people who understood today's real picture and the people who simply felt reassured by a single headline number comes down to one habit: checking your own specific categories against the blended average, rather than trusting one number to describe an experience that has actually been far more uneven and far more difficult for millions of households than the headline suggests. Here is what I want you to carry away from this, stated as plainly as I know how. This is not a call to panic over today's report, and it is not a call to make any sudden move, because balance and clear thinking matter, especially with retirement income. It is a call to check your own actual monthly costs against the headline number, rather than trusting a single blended average to describe your own specific life, and to understand that a real documented squeeze on ordinary household purchasing power has now persisted for 4 straight months, regardless of how calm today's headline sounded. Whether a modest, deliberate allocation to gold or silver belongs in your own plan as a response to exactly this kind of pressure depends entirely on your own circumstances, your own timeline, and your own comfort with volatility. And I am not here to tell you the number. I am here to make sure you are working from your own real numbers instead of a single reassuring headline. Do not let anyone use this report to rush you into a costly decision today, because there will be people trying, and they get louder every time a report like this gets attention. And do not dismiss the deeper numbers. Either telling yourself a calm headline means everything underneath it must also be calm, because you just watched a sitting Fed president publicly disagree with that exact assumption on the very same morning. Those are 2 different mistakes, and the sensible path sits calmly between them. None of this is financial advice. Every figure I have referenced, the 3.4% headline rate, the decline in real average hourly earnings, the specific category increases in gasoline, fuel oil, airfares, and shelter, President Hammack's public statement, comes directly from the Bureau of Labor Statistics' own published report and public commentary from Federal Reserve officials. So you can verify every word of it yourself rather than take mine. I opened by telling you that today's report was called good news, and that your paycheck likely bought less than it did a year ago anyway, for the 4th month running. Now you understand exactly why a calm blended average sitting on top of real double-digit increases in the specific categories that actually determine how your own month feels, and a Fed president publicly pushing back against the very calm the headline was meant to convey. So let me leave you with the question underneath all of it. When a report gets called good news and your own bank statement tells you something different, which one do you think actually deserves to guide how you plan for the months ahead? The calm number everyone else is repeating, or the real one sitting quietly in your own receipts?